Okay, so this is now the part 2 note. So we looked at the discriminant, and if you notice, the discriminant is right here, the b squared minus 4ac. So it is a part of what we're going to do right now with the quadratic formula. What the quadratic formula does is it tells us the actual roots, solutions, x-intercepts to a problem. So this is the same thing that we actually did, like it's finding the same thing that we actually did when we were doing the factoring. But the difference is factoring won't always find us all of the solutions, because if it doesn't factor, like when we couldn't find numbers to multiply and then also add to give us the certain numbers we needed, we would just say that it was prime. When we're doing work and I'm asking you to solve, that's not really an option. So there's only one type of answer in our class that we'll be able to get in Algebra 1. And that's when we get the no real roots as our answer. But everything else we can find answers to, whether they're rational or irrational numbers, we'll be able to find the answers, but we have to use the quadratic formula. So to be honest, if you just want to stick with one method, this would be the method to use. It's usually on, like if you would have taken the MCAP, the formula would have been on there for you, but it's also a good thing to memorize. And if you go back and you watch the video, there's another video that's just linked to it. There's a quadratic formula song, and you'll know it for like the rest of your life. If we would have been in class, I would have asked you to sing it. Maybe we'll sing it at a check-in. But there is a quadratic formula song. And I actually didn't know anything about this song until I was in college, and one of my roommates was asking me for help with math. And she was like, well, there's a song. And I had no idea there was a song. So you can still do the quadratic formula and not use a song. But the song is also a fun way to remember how to do it. So just like when we did the part 1 notes, we will start out finding the A, B, and C values. It needs to be set equal to 0, just like I said on the part 1 notes before we start. So the first one is, so A is 1, B is -5, and C is -24. And then you just fill into the entire quadratic formula. Some people talk about this being -b, just like when we did, and you kind of see this in here too, when we did the axis of symmetry, -b over 2a. I talked about it being the opposite of b. I will still talk about it that way. I don't say -b, I say the opposite of b, because when b is negative, we have to remember. So the opposite of b, we're going to do 5. And then plus or minus. This plus or minus means one time we're going to use a plus sign, one time we're going to use a minus sign. It's shorthand, so I don't have to write it out 2 times right now. I'll show you how to use that in a second. And then the square root, and then we'll do the b squared minus 4ac. So just like the discriminant we did before. So -5 squared. Remember, the b squared always goes in parentheses. So -5 squared minus 4 times 1 times -24. And you divide all of that by 2 times the a, so 2 times 1. Okay? All right, so here's where the calculator comes into play. So again, same thing I already talked about. You have the graphing calculator that you can use. When you go to do this, you can do it a couple different ways. You can slow the process down and do everything. I'm going to actually suggest it this way. You can do it a little bit faster if you want to, but we are just going to type in what's underneath the square root, whatever's under the square root. Oh, wait, that's the discriminant. Just type the discriminant into the calculator. Okay, so we're going to start there again. We're going to do this slowly. Yes, there's a faster way to do it, and I'm okay if you have somebody else helping you and you do it that way. There's a reason why I'm going to slow it down a little bit. So we're going to leave the square root there. And the part that you're working out right now, again, is the discriminant. So you can use your calculator and type it in, just like we did before. So the -5 squared minus 4. You can use parentheses or the times symbol. It's fine. Okay. So you get 121. I'm going to put that underneath the square root because I haven't said to type the square root in yet. Okay, so 121, and then 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so what I would do next then, and again, you can work out then this 121 part. Again, this is actually slowing it down a whole lot, and it won't really make sense to why I'm asking you to do it this way until we get to another example, but it might help some of you guys calculator-wise, especially with me not being with you, to do it this slowly. So the square root of 121, you do second and the square key, so the second and the next squared, and then you put in 121, and then you push enter, so you get 11. If you know your perfect squares, that is a perfect square. And then you divide by 2. Okay, this is the next part. Again, I wish I was with you because this is where we make lots of careless errors. Even though I write it down a certain way, we make mistakes. This plus or minus means one time I'm going to do 5 plus 11 divided by 2. And another time I'll do 5 minus 11 divided by 2. That's all the plus or minus means. One time I'll make it plus. One time I'm going to make it a minus sign. But the most important part, when you type this in, you must use parentheses. Just like I talked about when we found the axis of symmetry earlier, if you don't use parentheses, guys, you're going to get the wrong answer. So when you go to do this, 5 plus 11, and then divide by 2. Okay, so you get, sorry, I moved that probably too fast. So then you get 8. So I have that x equals 8. That's one of my answers. And the other answer will be x equals, and so I can do 5 minus 11, oops, not that button, divided by 2, and then I get -3. Those are my two answers. Let me show you what happens if you don't use the parentheses. And that's a little bit hard to see. If you just do 5 minus 11 divided by 2, I get a totally different answer. I have -0.5 as my answer. So you have to use parentheses. It's the order of operations. You can leave your answers like this. Or again, you also know that I like the ordered pairs. What we're finding right now are the solutions, the x-intercepts. So if you would also like to, or would rather, you can leave your answers as ordered pairs. Either is fine. I'm totally fine with either answer. Okay, so then we just do it again. So with number 2. Again, before you start, they have to equal 0. If I look at this problem, clearly does not equal 0. So the very first thing I need to do is add the 1 over. So I get 5x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0. And then I'm doing my A is 5, my B is 3, and my C is 1. And I take all that information and I substitute it in. And so I get, and you can start with x equals out here in front. So -3, and then plus or minus, because it's just following the formula that's up here. So -3 plus or minus the square root. And here's your discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c. And then divide by 2 times a. Okay. And then again, we will work this out. I would just type in the discriminant first. So the part underneath the square root. Do not type the square root in. This is the problem of why it matters. But again, you can choose. I will show you what happens. So you do -3 plus or minus, and then we get the square root, and 3 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1 is -11. And then divide by 10. Okay. The next part we did was we worked out this square root part. And I'm going to show you. You're going to type that in your calculator. And again, hopefully you're using a calculator on the computer. If you don't have a graphing calculator, when I do the square root of -11 and I push enter, oh, I get an error message. And it says non-real answer. Remember, when I gave these answers before and I talked about the solutions, we talked about 1 real solution, 2 real solutions, or no real solutions. If the number, doesn't matter what the number is though, if the number under the square root is ever a negative, we can't do the problem, not in Algebra 1. So the answer is no real roots, which is basically what the error message just said. on the calculator. So you can do that problem, but you're going to have to wait till Algebra 2, and your solution is going to be an imaginary solution, and they'll teach you all about that. That's a little I button you see on your calculator with where the decimal is next to the 0. Those are imaginary solutions, and you'll learn about that then. Okay? And so then on number 3, you're going to do the same thing again, except you got to make sure it equals 0. Now, I like for my squared term to stay positive. So when I do this problem, I'm going to move everything so that my squared term stays positive. It doesn't matter, though. We get the same answer, but I'm going to subtract the x, and I'm going to subtract the 3 over to the other side. So x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. And so then I'll do my A is 1, my B is -1, and my C is -3. If you chose to move the x squared over because you were already doing it without me, totally fine. All of our numbers will be opposite signs to start with, but we'll still have the same final right answer. Like that won't mess anything up to have the signs, but everything should be, you should have a -1, a +1, a +3. That's what you would have. Okay, and I'm going to fill it in. So I'm going to do the opposite of B. So 1 plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Again, as you work through this, you can decide if you want to do it slowly, or let me show you. Your other option will still get the same answers, guys. The other option, if you're like, well, I don't want to have to find the discriminant first and then do this part, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do it. You pick. It doesn't matter. Go ahead. Let's type all of this in at one time, including the square root symbol. The only reason why I don't usually suggest this method is because, especially when I'm not with you, there's some careless errors that come in depending on the calculator you have and whether a parenthesis comes up or it doesn't come up. So that's the only reason why I would suggest you do it slowly. And especially if you don't have a graphing calculator, do it slowly. If you have one and it's like what we were using in class, go ahead. You can type all that in. And again, if you want to do it slowly, you'll still get the same answer. I'll tell you what you should have gotten underneath that square root in 1 second. Okay, so you'll do the square root. And we're going to do the -1 squared. And you should see the line with my square root is continuing on. If you're stopped, something's wrong. And again, that's why I sometimes don't suggest this method, although it works, because you sometimes make careless errors. And especially when I can't be with you to help you out, that's where the problems come in. Okay. When you get it, we get a decimal. That's okay. If we get decimals, depending on the worksheet, they sometimes specify. We're going to do 2 decimal places. There are some worksheets where they only ask you to do 1, so the 10th or the 100th. The more decimal places you actually round to, the more accurate your answer is. So it just kind of depends on what they want you to do. I'm asking you to do the nearest 100th place, though. So I'm going to move this real quick so I can write. When we go to do this, and we don't forget to divide by our 2 times A. So we'll do 1 plus or minus. Because I typed all of this in the calculator at one time, I just go straight to my answer. I don't have to do the part where I put the square root back around it. So that's why it's a little bit faster, but more careless errors come in doing it this way, just so you know. It is faster, but we sometimes make more mistakes. So when we do this, let me check, make sure I typed everything in right. 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times -3. All that looks good. So when we do this, we get 3.61. And then divide by 2. And so with our 2 answers then, same, everything else is the same exact process. One is 1 plus 3.61 divided by 2. And the other one is 1 minus 3.61 divided by 2. Okay, make sure you use the extra parentheses or you will get it wrong. And let's see what you end up getting. So 1 plus 3.61 divided by 2. So one of our answers is x equals 2.31. And then the other one, now just do a minus. Everything else stays the same, but just make it minus, and then it's -1.31. 3, 1. Those are your two answers. Again, you can also write it as ordered pairs. I'm kind of running out of space, so I'll just leave it like this, but you can also go back and do the ordered pairs. For those of you who maybe did this a little bit slower, let me show you what you would have out to the side. What you would have done is you would have had 1 plus or minus the square root, and then you would have just had an 11. Oh, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. You would have 13. Sorry about that. And then divide by 2. And then again, all you have to do then is the square root of 13, and you'll see you'll get right back to what we already had here. So if you wanted to slow it down, you could do it this way. If you just did the discriminant, you get 13. Put the square root back around it. And then the square root of 13 is 3.61, and now we're at the same spot, okay, if you needed that. And then the last one. So, again, this one, not so bad. You just got to make sure you move over the 125. So 5x squared plus 50x plus 125 equals 0. So A is 5. B is 50, that's a 0. C is 125. And then you just fill everything in. So you can do the x equals, and then it's negative, the opposite of B, so negative 50 plus or minus the square root of 50 squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. So 2 times, sorry, that's a 5. 2 times 5. Again, your choice. You can work the whole thing out, or we can do it slowly. It does not matter to me which way you do it. But just make sure you try that part. And then we will get x equals negative 50. And then plus or minus. If you do it slowly, the discriminant is actually, so if you just do the part underneath the square root and you did not type the square root in, you have to write the square root back down. And you get the square root of 0. And then 2 times 5 is 10. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0. So negative 50 plus or minus 0 divided by 10. And so you have negative 50 plus 0 divided by 10. And negative 50 minus 0 divided by 10. Oh, well, when you do that, you get the same answer twice, which is negative 5. So the one reason why it's kind of nice to be able to do the problems a little bit slower is so that you can actually look at the discriminant each time you do it. So when I did the first problem, my discriminant, the number under the square root, was 121. Well, it's a positive number. That means I have 2 solutions. When I did the discriminant of the second problem, I get a negative number, which meant I had no real solutions. Number 3, again, a positive number, 2 solutions. And on number 4, it was 0, which means I have 1 solution. So again, the discriminant's important. It comes back in again on this, but you could do it a little bit faster and type all of this in the calculator at once. You just skip over that step of seeing the discriminant to know how you're doing with your final answers. But that's okay. But again, careless errors really come into play if you try to type too much in at one time. Okay, so just be really careful. Make sure you show all your work, especially when you're going through your classwork. Try the extra practice, and then come to the check-in with any questions you might have.